Before we drift into tonight's tale of the land before Ooo, I'd love to know where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. All right, lights low, blankets up, let's begin. Close your eyes for a moment and picture a time before the Candy Kingdom, before wizards and princesses, before magic itself crept back into the cracks of reality. We are going to drift back to Earth, not as we know it through Oo's whimsical lens, but as it may have been in its final golden age, a time when humanity was at its peak, when the world still ran on circuits, wires, and dreams of progress rather than spells and incantations. The Earth of that age would have glowed from space like a jeweled lantern, cities sprawling in every direction, their lights painting rivers of gold and white across the night side of the globe. Towers of glass and steel touched the clouds. Highways carried endless streams of motion, and the hum of technology was constant. To live in those days would have been to exist in a world where everything felt within reach, as though humanity had climbed to the very top of the ladder of invention and was peering over into something even greater. Imagine the way people must have felt, walking through streets filled with neon glow and buzzing machines. They had vehicles that could cross continents, aircrafts that carried them into the sky, and perhaps even stations orbiting far above, looking down on Earth with a quiet watchfulness. There would have been a sense of pride in how far they had come, how much knowledge had been gathered, and how tightly they held onto the idea that progress was endless. But there is always a quiet contrast between the light of a city and the shadows it casts. For all the brilliance of that age, there were whispers of unease. Nations competing for dominance, corporations reaching ever deeper into the fabric of life, and technologies so powerful they felt like magic themselves. Beneath the calm surface, the future was already trembling, though perhaps most people chose not to notice. That is often the way with golden ages. They are remembered in hindsight as times of peace, but in truth, they carry the seeds of the storm that follows. Still, to walk in those years must have been something wondrous. Imagine standing at the edge of a great ocean, the waves stretching farther than the eye can see, and behind you, the skyline of a human-made marvel, glittering like starlight brought down to Earth. The blend of nature and technology would have created a sense of being at the center of everything, as though the world had truly been conquered and made safe for generations to come. There were hospitals filled with machines that could heal, libraries that stored knowledge from across centuries, and art created with tools that seemed to defy the imagination. Music was broadcast across invisible waves, reaching homes instantly. Food could be brought from one side of the world to another, wrapped in the marvel of preservation that science allowed. Daily life was an orchestra of comfort and possibility. And yet, when you look closely, there's something almost fragile about this image. Humanity had become so reliant on its creations that the line between survival and collapse was thinner than it appeared. A city glowing at night is beautiful, but it is also a hungry thing, requiring constant power, resources, and labor. The very machines that made life so simple were also chains that bound the world to a delicate balance. Without them, the illusion of endless progress would have faltered quickly. Perhaps the people of that time never noticed the ground shifting under their feet. When you are surrounded by comfort, it's easy to believe it will last forever. The hum of a refrigerator, the glow of a screen, the gentle vibration of a train pulling into a station, these everyday wonders were so ordinary that they felt eternal. In truth, they were only ever temporary, fragile notes in a song that would soon change key. Still, Let us linger a little longer in that golden earth, because bedtime stories should not rush. Picture a child in their room, high up in a skyscraper, gazing out at the vast ocean of lights below. Somewhere in another part of the city, a scientist works late in a lab, chasing the next breakthrough. Families gather in homes full of warmth, their evenings lit by lamps and screens. The earth of that time was alive in every direction, every hour of the day, a ceaseless dance of energy and ambition. And high above, in the silence of orbit, satellites circled patiently. They watched the world glitter. They carried voices and signals across continents, and they held the silent memory of a species that had reached out beyond its cradle. To look down from that vantage point would have been to see a world so full of promise, so radiant in its illusion of permanence, that the thought of an ending would seem absurd. But golden ages do not last forever. They shine brightly, and then often, without warning, they slip away. The earth that we now know through the strange and magical lens of Ooo is built on the ruins of that very age. Somewhere beneath the enchanted forests and candy castles lie the bones of cities, the remnants of highways, and the echoes of a civilization that believed it would never fall. If you could walk those streets now, they would feel almost alien compared to the playful, magical lands of Ooo. The air would hum with engines, screens would glow on every corner, and advertisements would stretch high above the sidewalks. Towers reached so high that they seemed like man-made mountains, glass and steel glittering as the sun struck them. In the shadow of those towers, people hurried about, caught in the rhythm of modern life, never knowing that their world would one day vanish almost completely, leaving only scattered relics. Think of the machines that filled those days. Tiny devices that fit in the palm of a hand but connected a person to the entire globe. Vehicles that whispered across smooth roads at impossible speeds. Machines that flew through the skies, ferrying thousands from city to city every hour. And hidden deeper still, there were machines no ordinary person ever saw. Vast networks of computers calculating and storing, reactors spinning power from unseen forces, weapons that slumbered in bunkers. It was a time where the invisible was just as important as the visible, where unseen signals and digital whispers carried the heartbeat of civilization. What must the natural world have felt like under the shadow of so much human achievement? Forests still stood tall, oceans still roared, mountains still guarded the sky, but everywhere nature bore the touch of human hands. Rivers rerouted, landscapes reshaped, skies brushed with the faint haze of pollution. Humanity had grown so powerful that the earth itself was no longer entirely its own master. And yet, despite this control, the planet still pulsed with beauty. Imagine golden fields of wheat swaying in the wind, beaches filled with the laughter of children, and parks nestled between towers where people sought a moment of calm beneath the branches of trees. This was an age of wonders, but also of contradictions. On one hand, life had never been more comfortable. On the other, there was a restlessness, a constant drive for more energy, more technology, more control. It was as if humanity, having conquered so much, was afraid of stillness. They pushed further into space, further into science, further into inventions that reached beyond imagination. Some say that is what defines a golden age. It is not the peace it offers, but the ambition it ignites. And ambition is both beautiful and dangerous. At night, the earth glowed brighter than the stars. From the ground, the view was breathtaking city lights stretching to the horizon, neon signs reflecting in glass towers, the hum of traffic like a constant lullaby. From above, The view was even more extraordinary. Astronauts once described how fragile the world looked from orbit. A glowing ball of blue. Thin clouds drifting over lands painted with light. They saw no borders, no nations, just one shared world, alive and delicate. But as with all beautiful things, there was an undercurrent of fragility. A city powered by endless electricity could be silenced in a moment if that power faltered. A society so reliant on networks could stumble if those signals went dark. Beneath the shining surface, humanity's foundations were built on complexity layers of invention, stacked on one another, each essential to the next. It was a marvel, yes, but also a delicate chain, where the breaking of one link could shake the whole. For the people of that age, though, life felt steady. Children studied in schools, buzzing with screens and gadgets. Families gathered in homes warmed by machines that kept the cold away. Workers commuted through sprawling networks of trains, buses, and cars. Entertainment filled the air, music, movies, games shared across the invisible threads of the digital world. These were ordinary days, simple to the people living them, extraordinary when remembered now in the ruins. And everywhere there was sound. The whir of engines, the murmur of voices, the chatter of radios and televisions. Earth was alive with a chorus of human life, constant and unbroken. To stand in the middle of a city and close your eyes would be to hear humanity itself woven together in an endless song of motion. That sound has long since faded, replaced in ooh with the laughter of candy people, the roar of magical beasts, the quiet hum of enchanted forests. But once it was the heartbeat of the world. Picture, if you will, the balance of ordinary and extraordinary that filled those days. A teacher writing on a smartboard while a student daydreamed about the stars. A doctor using machines that could see into the body, healing illnesses that would have been fatal centuries before. Farmers guiding tractors across vast fields, the engines humming steadily under a wide open sky. Humanity touch stretched from the smallest corner of a household to the furthest reaches of orbit. Every life was threaded into a vast tapestry of invention, and for many, that felt like the very definition of progress. Yet as dazzling as it was, this golden earth was also restless. Progress had become less about need and more about desire. People wanted to move faster, to build taller, to know more, to reach farther. The old frontiers of land and sea had already been crossed, so they turned to new ones, outer space, genetic design, artificial minds that could think alongside them. To the people of that time, these were promises of a brighter tomorrow. But as bedtime stories remind us, promises can be both gifts and burdens. In quiet moments, away from the noise of cities, the natural world remained, though changed. Birds still sang at dawn, waves still kissed the shores, and the wind still carried scents through forests. But alongside those timeless rhythms came the steady hum of machines. Satellites blinked in the night sky like new stars, airplanes painted white trails across the blue, and oil rigs dotted the oceans. The earth was still alive, but it was dressed in human invention, wrapped in layers of steel and signal. It is easy to imagine that people rarely thought of an ending. The rhythm of life was too full, too immediate. You wake in the morning. You go to work or school, you laugh with friends, you dream about the future. Few would have paused to wonder whether the ground beneath their feet could ever give way. After all, history had always marched forward, and every generation believed they were climbing higher than the one before. The thought that the climb might suddenly collapse was almost unthinkable, and so they built more. They carved deeper into the earth, drew more power from it, and created weapons whose destructive potential far outpaced the imaginations of their ancestors. Some of those weapons were locked away, never meant to be used, only held as symbols of strength. Others were tested, bursting deserts into glass, shaking mountains with echoes of thunder louder than storms. The world carried these weapons like a heart, carries a secret illness silent, unseen, but dangerous all the same. Still, most of humanity lived without ever touching that shadow. Their days were filled with laughter, with work, with play. Children learned songs, lovers walked hand in hand beneath neon lights, families gathered around tables for meals. Life in a golden age has a way of hiding the cracks. As long as the lights shone and the machines hummed, it felt endless. That is perhaps why the memories of that world linger so strongly in the ruins Ooo now holds. They are not just echoes of technology, they are echoes of dreams, of lives lived in comfort, of stories interrupted too soon. When we look at Ooo, with its enchanted forests and candy kingdoms, it is almost impossible to imagine that beneath its surface lies this forgotten earth, a subway tunnel buried under a hill, a skyscraper's bones hidden beneath layers of soil, a satellite still orbiting silently, long after its signals have faded. The world before Ooo was not erased all at once. It was buried layer by layer until only fragments peeked through. And those fragments remind us that the magical world we know was built upon a foundation of something very human, very fragile, and very real. At night, perhaps, there were people who sensed the weight of what was coming. Writers scribbling stories of imagined apocalypses. Artists painting strange, fractured futures. Scientists worrying over data that hinted at imbalance. But such voices are often drowned out by the noise of progress. When a world glitters so brightly, it is easy to look only at the light and not at the shadows pooling just out of sight. That is what makes this golden earth so haunting in memory. It was beautiful, alive, filled with brilliance and laughter, and yet it was always teetering, like a candle flame burning brighter just before the wax runs out. A civilization at its peak is often closer to its fall than it realizes. For the earth before Ooo, that peak was breathtaking. Skies filled with planes, streets alive with neon glow, seas crossed by ships that linked continents in days. It must have felt invincible, eternal. And perhaps that is the greatest tragedy, that such radiance was destined to flicker out, leaving behind a world utterly transformed. Let us wander a little deeper into the lives of those who lived in that time, because the story of a golden age is not just about towers and machines, but about people. Picture an evening in a bustling city, restaurants glowing with warm light, streets buzzing with laughter and chatter, music drifting from open windows. Somewhere, in a quiet corner of the same city, a poet is writing about the stars, wondering if humanity will one day live among them. Across the ocean, a scientist is bending over a microscope, their discoveries carrying both promise and peril. And in a small town, far from the noise of neon lights, a family sits on their porch watching the sunset, believing that tomorrow will be much like today. That belief in tomorrow was one of humanity's greatest comforts. Progress had become a rhythm, and each new year brought something brighter, faster, more astonishing. Machines that could speak, computers that could learn, medicines that stretched lives farther than anyone in history could have imagined. There was an energy to the world then, a sense of momentum, as though humanity was not just living history but racing ahead of it. Yet golden ages often hide contradictions, and this one was no different. Beneath the shining surface, the world was straining. Cities consumed more power than ever before. Oceans carried traces of industry. Forests shrank as fields and buildings spread. For every marvel humanity created, something else was quietly lost. But loss is easy to overlook when the gains are so dazzling. Few pause to imagine what might happen if the balance tipped too far. There were thinkers who warned of it, storytellers who imagined futures where the glitter faded. Science fiction writers sketched worlds where machines turned cold, where skies darkened, where humanity faced the cost of its own ambition. Some of those stories may have seemed fanciful then, bedtime tales for curious minds, but in hindsight, they feel almost prophetic, as if deep down humanity sensed that such brilliance could not last forever. Still, the people of that age lived their lives with hope. Students dreamed of being astronauts or inventors. Engineers worked on projects that might change the world. Artists painted murals across concrete walls, adding color to cities of glass and steel. Musicians filled concert halls, their songs amplified by technologies that let sound reach thousands at once. It was a vibrant, ceaseless world, full of voices and visions. And it was global. For the first time in human history, the world was connected as one. A voice in one country could reach ears in another in seconds. A photograph could circle the globe instantly. Families separated by oceans could see each other through glowing screens. Nations traded not only goods but ideas and culture, blending traditions in ways unimaginable centuries before. Humanity had built itself into a single great network, a web of connections so vast that no individual could fully see its shape. This interconnectedness was both a wonder and a vulnerability, because when everything is tied together, the strength of the whole depends on every part. If one thread frays, the ripples can spread across the web. This truth would only be realized too late, but for now it remained hidden beneath the pride of progress. Imagine drifting above this Earth, looking down from orbit. You would see dazzling clusters of light marking cities, dark oceans stretching between them, and clouds swirling gently in the atmosphere. It would look alive, thriving, invincible. From that distance, no one could have guessed that beneath the beauty lay tensions that would one day crack the world wide open. That is the haunting beauty of the last golden Earth that wore a mask of perfection, even as the foundations beneath were trembling. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it still. The sound of car horns, the chatter of voices in a dozen languages, the low hum of a subway far beneath the ground. You can imagine the faint glow of a television through a window, the flicker of a street lamp, the steady pulse of machines that never rested. All of it ordinary to the people living there. All of it extraordinary now in the silence left behind. That silence is what makes Ooo so strange when compared to what came before. For in the land of Ooo, the hum of machines has been replaced by the laughter of candy citizens, the roar of dragons, the whispers of magic. But the ground they walk upon, the rivers they sail, the skies they fly across, all of it, was shaped first by that golden Earth. The ruins and relics that surface now and again are not just curiosities. They are the fingerprints of a world that once believed itself unshakable. As we close this chapter of the tale, remember the image of that Earth at its brightest. A civilization at the height of its ambition. A planet glowing with lights, alive with voices, brimming with energy. It was fragile, yes, and destined to fall, but it was also beautiful in ways Ooo could never entirely erase. For buried beneath the magic and whimsy of Ooo lies the memory of that last golden Earth, still waiting to be remembered in quiet bedtime stories like this one. When we think of Ooo, we picture landscapes full of magic, each corner bursting with colors and wonders that seem too strange to ever belong to our own Earth. But if we trace the story back, before the war, before the shift into enchantment, we find another Earth beneath it all, a quieter one. A world shaped by oceans, mountains, and forests, long before candy people or flame kingdoms rose from its soil. Close your eyes and let yourself drift across that old Earth. Imagine endless forests stretching across continents, their canopies so thick that sunlight fell in golden streams through the leaves. Rivers wound lazily through valleys, carrying fish and whispers of ancient times. Great plains reached to the horizon, grass bending with the wind, herds of animals moving across them in slow rhythm. The natural earth had a pulse of its own, one that carried through every sound of rustling leaves, crashing waves, and distant storms. Now think of Oo's strange geography. Deserts with candy ruins, frozen wastelands guarded by icy magic, and mountains that seem to twist in unnatural shapes. It feels alien, but beneath it all lies the memory of the land that came before. The Ice Kingdom, for example, may have once been a range of northern mountains, vast and snow-covered, shaped by glaciers and storms long before the Mushroom War. What is now an enchanted realm of frozen castles may once have been home to wolves and bears, travelers bundled in coats, and northern lights dancing across the sky. The Candy Kingdom, cheerful and whimsical, might sit atop the ruins of a once bustling city. Beneath its sugar-coated streets could lie roads of asphalt, now buried under centuries of change. The soil that grows peppermint plants and gumdrop trees may still hold fragments of ancient structures, hints of a forgotten urban sprawl. The laughter of candy people may echo faintly over the ghosts of cars that once honked and children who once played in schoolyards. Everywhere in Ooo there are reminders of these forgotten landscapes. A dungeon that seems to stretch endlessly underground may in fact be the skeleton of a subway system. A forest full of whispering shadows could be what remains of a park that once belonged to a human city. Even the great seas of Ooo hold secrets. Sunken ships from a pre-war navy, fragments of bridges that once connected bustling lands, and entire coastlines reshaped by catastrophe and time. What makes this so haunting is the way nature has reclaimed it all. The golden earth was built on steel, glass, and concrete, but the war broke those structures, and centuries allowed vines, roots, and soil to cover them. Where highways once carried cars, trees now grow in cracks, their roots wrapping around rusting metal. Where skyscrapers once touched the sky, hills of earth may now rise, hiding their bones deep beneath. And where cities once glowed with light, Oo's magical wilderness now blooms. Think of the vast plains before Ooo. Imagine golden grass swaying in winds that stretched from horizon to horizon. Now those plains may be dotted with strange creatures, magical hybrids, born from the war's fallout. The land is still there, but it has been reshaped, its identity rewritten by time and by magic. What was once familiar has become surreal, as though the earth itself put on a dreamlike mask. In many ways, Oo's beauty feels almost like nature healing itself. The scars of war gave way to enchanted forests, sparkling caves, and strange landscapes that no human could have designed. Yet within those wonders lies a quiet sadness. Because beneath the candy-colored mountains and mystical lakes, there are still traces of the old Earth's simplicity. The kind of beauty that required no magic, just the steady rhythm of rivers, the silence of deserts, the majesty of snow-capped peaks. If you stand in Ooo and let yourself listen carefully, you might hear both voices at once. The voice of a magical world alive with enchantment, and the faint, distant echo of a world of stone, water, and soil. One world built upon another, layered like memories in a dream. Think of the deserts of Ooo, wide and silent, sometimes home to ruins that jut out of the sands like broken teeth. These arid stretches may once have been fertile valleys or bustling regions where people lived, worked, and built. Over time, heat and fallout might have burned away the soil's richness, leaving only dust behind. What was once farmland, green with crops and villages, could have become the wastelands where strange monsters now roam. Even in its silence, the desert remembers. Every shifting dune might be covering roads, houses, or even whole towns that were lost to time. The oceans of pre-war Earth must have been vast, teeming with life. Whales sang to each other across great distances. Coral reefs bloomed with color, and currents carried warmth and nutrients around the globe. After the war, many of those waters would have changed. Radiation and collapse may have reshaped ecosystems, birthing the strange sea creatures we see in Ooo. Still, the waves themselves are timeless. The sound of water rushing to shore in Ooo is the same sound that echoed in the ears of ancient sailors and travelers long before magic ever rose again. Mountains, too, carry memory. Before Ooo, they stood as immense guardians of stone, carved by wind and rain over millions of years. In Ooo, many of them appear strange, split open with glowing crystals, or crowned with bizarre structures. Yet beneath the enchantments and mutations, the bones of those mountains are the same. Somewhere within their silent ridges, the rocks remember an earth without candy people or kingdoms, an earth where only the sound of the wind marked the passage of time. One of the most fascinating questions about these forgotten landscapes is how much of them survived beneath Oo's magic. The Mushroom War was catastrophic, yet it did not erase the planet completely. Instead, it scarred it, changed it, and left space for something new to rise. But that new world is layered over the old. If one could peel back the forests, the enchanted hills, the magical kingdoms, you would still find the map of Earth etched underneath. Rivers still flow in the same paths they once did. Mountains still rise where they always have, and coastlines still curve with familiar shapes, even if they are altered by the passage of time. It is almost as though Ooo is both a new land and an echo of the old, a mirror world built upon the skeleton of the earth that came before. Every enchanted meadow may once have been a human park. Every crumbling ruin may once have been a library, a school, or a home. And every kingdom may sit on ground that once held the memories of people who never imagined what their world would become. There is something bittersweet in this. On the one hand, it is comforting to know that nature reclaimed what was lost. Where smoke and machines once dominated, now forests, rivers, and magical beings thrive. On the other hand, there is a quiet sadness in realizing that much of what humanity built has been buried or forgotten. What was once familiar ground is now unrecognizable, dressed in strange colors filled with beings that would have seemed impossible to those who came before. Yet bedtime stories are not about mourning, but about remembering. When you imagine Oo's landscapes, let yourself see the ghost of the old earth within them. See the Candy Kingdom not only as a land of sugar, but as a city layered over forgotten streets. See the Ice Kingdom not only as a frozen castle, but as mountains that stood long before. See the deserts not only as wastelands, but as fields where once the wind carried the smell of grass and rain. In doing so, Ooo becomes more than a magical world. It becomes a palimpsest, a layered story where the past is written beneath the present. And in that layered story, we can glimpse both the tragedy of what was lost and the beauty of what has grown in its place. When you look at Ooo from above, whether through maps shown in the series or through imagined flights over its lands, the shapes of continents and coasts still echo the Earth that came before. Scholars and fans often point out that Ooo resembles a twisted version of our own world, as if the Mushroom War cracked the continents like glass and let the sea spill into the fractures. Those shapes are not accidental. They are the shadows of landscapes once known, distorted by fire and time. The plains of Ooo, where we see grass stretching endlessly beneath the sky, may have been prairies once walked by herds of animals or cultivated by farmers who relied on their soil. Grasslands are resilient, able to grow back even after devastation, and perhaps that is why they remain so dominant in Oo's scenery. The grasses that sway beneath Finn's feet may be the descendants of the same blades that brushed against the legs of humans who lived thousands of years earlier. A simple reminder that nature, though scarred, always finds its way home. In some corners of Ooo, forests rise tall and enchanted, their trees bending in unusual ways, their leaves glowing with odd colors. Magic seems woven into their roots, but perhaps beneath that enchantment lies something older. Imagine those forests as they might have been. Birch groves, pine woods, tropical jungles, each tree a guardian of memory. When the Mushroom War ended, seeds and roots would have remained, hidden beneath ash and ruin. Given time, they would sprout again, reshaping the world with green life. Oo's forests, then, are not entirely alien. They are survivors of the old Earth, dressed in new magical forms. Caves and underground networks tell another story. The catacombs beneath Ooo may have once been subway tunnels, mines, or research facilities. Over centuries, rock and soil might have claimed them, twisting them into labyrinths that creatures of Ooo now inhabit. There is a haunting thought here. Beneath the feet of every candy person, every adventurer, every creature wandering through Ooo, there may be entire forgotten cities buried in silence. Lights that once glowed with electricity have long gone out, but the shapes of walls and hallways might still linger in the dark, hidden away from the new world above. Even rivers remember their old paths. Look closely at Oo's maps, and you can trace the winding routes of water as though they were always meant to be there. These rivers carried life long before the Mushroom wore fresh water for drinking, for growing crops, for connecting communities. Now they continue to flow, though their banks may be guarded by magical beasts or shadowed by kingdoms. There is something beautiful in that continuity. No matter how much the world changes, water always seeks its path. Lakes, too, carry their secrets. In Ooo, we often see lakes with mysterious qualities. Glowing waters, hidden creatures, portals to strange places. Perhaps these lakes were once simple reservoirs or glacial basins. As magic seeped into the earth after the war, the water may have absorbed it, transforming ordinary lakes into mystical pools. To stand by their shores in Ooo is to stand beside the past itself reflected in the ripples. Consider also the skies. Before Ooo, they were much like our own, filled with the steady rhythm of weather. Rainstorms, snowfalls, sunsets, painted in orange and pink. In Ooo, these skies can shift suddenly, bending into colors that don't quite exist in our spectrum, birthing storms of strange intensity. But even these altered skies are rooted in the old earth. The winds that carry clouds across Ooo may be the same currents of air that once carried the scents of city streets, or the cries of migrating birds, or the smoke of fires from long ago. One of the most poignant landscapes of all may be the ruins, those fragments of human civilization that still poke through Oo's strange beauty. Crumbling highways, broken skyscrapers, shattered bridges. They stand not only as remnants of technology, but also as reminders that the land beneath Ooo is layered with history. Where Finn and Jake might see a playground of adventure, we can imagine the lives of those who once traveled those roads, built those homes, and dreamed of futures that would never come to pass. This is what makes Ooo such a haunting place to dream about. It is not only a magical land of candy people, talking animals, and cosmic forces, it is also a memorial to what came before. Every hill, every valley, every stone may be whispering a story that goes back thousands of years, to a time when magic was just a word in books, and the landscapes of Earth belonged to people much like us. If we allow ourselves to drift even deeper into this thought, we begin to notice that Ooo is not just built upon Earth, it is Earth, reshaped, reimagined, and reborn through the passage of time. The mountains, the forests, the plains, and the seas are not merely stages for the characters' adventures. They are characters in their own right. Silent witnesses, patient keepers of memory, carrying the weight of everything that came before. Think about the valleys that stretch far and wide. In Ooo, many of them are lush, enchanted, or teeming with magical creatures. But before, those valleys might have been industrial hearts, lined with factories and cities. The echoes of human progress and perhaps human mistakes may still live in the soil. When Finn walks through the grass, he could be treading the same ground where once engines roared and smoke billowed into the skies. The war may have silenced those machines, but the valleys themselves endure, softened by green life and magical renewal. The cliffs and coastlines of Ooo are another reminder of forgotten beauty. Jagged, dramatic, and often strange in shape, they are the result of a long history of water and wind carving into stone. Before the war, those coasts might have been home to seaside towns, bustling ports, and stretches of beaches filled with people enjoying the sun. In Ooo, those human traces are mostly gone, but if you stand at the edge of the sea and listen to the waves, the rhythm is unchanged. It is the same song the ocean has always sung, through countless ages of joy, tragedy, and rebirth. Even the smallest details carry weight. The flowers that bloom in Ooo, often glowing with unusual hues or sprouting in impossible shapes, might be descendants of the flowers of Earth. Genetic changes, magical interference, and irradiation would have altered them, but their roots lie deep in the soil of a familiar past. When a meadow blooms with a color in Ooo, it may be carrying forward the memory of gardens planted by human hands long ago. There is also the question of weather. We know Ooo has strange and unpredictable patterns, but the foundations of its climate still trace back to the Earth before. Winds still shift with the seasons, rains still fall to nourish the land, snow still blankets the mountains in cold silence. What has changed is not the cycle itself, but the way it manifests. The war and the rise of magic created new layers of unpredictability, turning storms into something almost alive, and skies into canvases painted by forces beyond science. Yet, even within that strangeness, we can glimpse the Earth of yesterday. This blending of old and new, of forgotten and remembered, is what gives Ooo its haunting beauty. Every adventure we see takes place in a world layered with hidden depths. Behind every enchanted forest is an ancient woodland. Beneath every ruin is the memory of a human city. And beneath every footstep is a story that stretches further back, than most inhabitants of Ooo could ever imagine. For the people of Ooo, these landscapes are simply their home. They do not see the ghostly maps we imagine, nor do they hear the echoes of lost cities beneath the soil. For Finn, Jake, and their friends, the meadows are just meadows, the deserts just deserts, and the oceans simply oceans. And perhaps that is part of the magic, the idea that life moves forward, even when it is layered over ruins. That joy and wonder can spring from places that once knew fire and ruin. But for us, as sleepy dreamers wandering in imagination, there is a unique comfort in remembering that Ooo is not entirely detached from us. It is not just a fantasy world, but also a reflection of our own. When we imagine its landscapes, we are also imagining what might lie beneath: the lost earths, the forgotten places, the whispers of valleys, mountains, and seas that shaped the lives of those who came before. So as you picture Ooo tonight, try to see it in two ways. See it as it is a land of color, magic, and endless adventure. But also see it as it was a land of people, of cities, of forests, and oceans untouched by enchantment. When these two visions overlap, Ooo becomes something even greater, a bridge between the past and the present, a reminder that even in endings, there are always new beginnings. And in that quiet realization, the landscapes of Ooo are not just forgotten. They are remembered, gently, by those who choose to listen. By you here tonight, imagining the land before Ooo and hearing its echoes in the stillness of your own heart. The earth before Ooo was not only a land of landscapes and quiet beauty, it was also shaped by the hands of humankind, a species with dreams far bigger than themselves. Humans were builders, dreamers, explorers, and sometimes destroyers. They looked at the vastness of the earth, and instead of simply living alongside it, they sought to shape it, to bend it, to use it for their own visions of progress. This was the age of ambition, when humanity believed the future was theirs to command. Imagine towering cities rising higher than the clouds, filled with endless lights that glittered like constellations on the ground. Roads stretched like veins across continent, carrying goods, people, and ideas from one end of the earth to another. Machines of steel and fire cut through the skies, connecting distant places in hours rather than weeks. To live in that age must have felt like standing at the edge of possibility itself. Humanity believed there were no limits, only horizons waiting to be crossed. But ambition is a double-edged sword. For every breathtaking marvel, there was also cost. Forests fell to make way for highways, rivers were dammed to power cities, and the air grew heavy with smoke and fumes. To build their towers of glass and metal, humans stripped the earth of resources that had taken millions of years to form. Still, they pressed onward, convinced that their ingenuity could solve any problem they created. The earth of that time was alive with motion, humming with electricity, but also trembling under the weight of human desire. The people of that age were not content with the ground beneath their feet. Their gaze turned skyward into the stars. Spacecraft pierced the skies, satellites circled the planet, and humans even set foot upon the moon. The cosmos, once a canvas of untouchable mystery, was now a playground of exploration. It was as though humanity believed themselves destined to rise beyond Earth itself, to carry their ambition into the heavens. And yet while they reached upward, they often overlooked the fragile world below them. Technology advanced at a pace never before seen. Computers shrank from room-sized machines to objects that fit in the palm of a hand. Networks linked nations together, allowing voices, thoughts, and stories to travel faster than light in the imagination. Medicine leapt forward, curing diseases that once plagued entire civilizations. For many, it was an age of miracles, where life expectancy grew, comforts expanded, and dreams became attainable in ways their ancestors could never have imagined. Yet with each leap came shadows. Weapons grew more powerful, capable of destruction on scales once unthinkable. Knowledge once meant for healing or creation was turned toward war. Entire nations competed, racing not only to achieve progress but also to prove dominance. The same ambition that pushed humanity to create wonders also pushed them closer to the edge of ruin. Still, it is important to imagine not just the flaws, but also the spirit of that age. Humans dreamed with fire in their hearts. They wrote stories of utopias, of peace, of harmony between man and machine, between earth and the stars. Their art and music carry visions of futures where suffering was gone and joy was endless. In the laughter of children playing in city parks, in the quiet determination of scientists staring at the stars, in the simple kindness of strangers helping one another, there was a beauty to that ambition. The earth before Ooo was alive with contradictions. It was a place where humanity built skyscrapers but also painted sunsets, where they split the atom but also wrote poems about the ocean. It was an age where the human spirit seemed unstoppable, full of promise, full of peril. And so, as we drift into sleep tonight, imagine those cities of light, those forests of steel, those rivers of motion and sound. Imagine a world buzzing with energy, alive with the hum of ambition, a world on the cusp of greatness and disaster all at once. For in that age, before Ooo, humanity was writing the final chapters of the old earth, chapters that would one day lead into the birth of the land we know now. Picture a sprawling metropolis at dusk. Skyscrapers glisten in the fading sunlight, their glass faces catching fire with orange and gold. Below, millions of people move through streets buzzing with life, cars rushing, neon signs flickering, voices blending into a constant hum. To a visitor, it must have felt like standing at the center of the universe, where anything was possible. Cities like these became monuments to ambition, built higher and higher as though reaching for the heavens. But not all ambition lived in towers, in quiet laboratories, tucked away in universities and hidden facilities. Thinkers worked tirelessly to unlock secrets of the universe. They discovered new forms of energy, experimented with genetics, and probed the deepest mysteries of matter itself. To them, ambition was not about wealth or power, but about knowledge. The pursuit of understanding gave humanity tools that could either elevate or destroy them. It was an age of both profound brilliance and terrifying potential. Ambition also reshaped the very rhythms of daily life. Families enjoyed comforts their ancestors would have considered unimaginable. Machines washed clothes, prepared food, and even connected voices across oceans in an instant. Journeys that once took weeks could be completed in hours. For many, ambition had transformed existence into something almost magical, long before the magic of Ooo would ever rise. Yet underneath this glittering surface, fault lines deepened. Inequality grew sharper as some reaped the rewards of progress, while others were left behind. The same ambition that built skyscrapers also allowed poverty to persist in their shadows. The same technologies that carried voices across the globe also spread fear and propaganda. Progress was not equally shared, and in that imbalance, seeds of conflict were sown. Nature, too, bore the weight of this ambition. Forests thinned, oceans filled with plastic and oil, and skies darkened with smoke. For every triumph of human progress, the earth itself seemed to sigh a little heavier. Rivers diverted from their natural courses. Species vanished forever, and landscapes that had endured for millennia changed in the span of decades. Humanity pressed forward, often blind to the scars they left behind. But even in this, there was beauty, for ambition was not solely destructive. Across the world, movements rose to protect nature, to heal the wounds left by industry. People planted trees where forests had fallen. Communities fought to clean rivers, to preserve wildlife, to ensure that ambition would not mean annihilation. Humanity's story was always layered, always complicated, always a balance between reaching too far and holding close to what truly mattered. Art captured this complexity in ways words alone could not. Painters filled canvases with visions of bustling cities and fragile landscapes. Musicians wrote songs of longing, progress, and resistance. Writers penned tales of futures both radiant and dark, warning of what might come if ambition went unchecked. Through their creativity, humanity spoke not only to themselves, but also to those who would one day inherit their world. Perhaps in those stories and songs, there are whispers that still echo into Ooo. And so the age of ambition became paradox. It was an age of light and shadow, of progress and peril, of dreams reaching higher than the sky and fears crawling deep into the soil. To live in that time was to live in the tension between hope and dread. The future seemed both dazzling and dangerous, as if humanity walked a tightrope stretched across history itself. When we look back at this age through the lens of Ooo, we see not only the mistakes that led to ruin, but also the incredible spark that defined humanity. Their ambition was flawed and sometimes reckless, but it was also beautiful. It was the fire that carried them through millennia of struggle, the fire that built civilizations, the fire that allowed them to imagine worlds far beyond their own. Tonight, as you imagine the old Earth, picture it alive with that fire. See the glowing cities, the sprawling networks, the dreams written in steel and glass. Hear the hum of machines, the rush of voices, the heartbeat of a species convinced it could reach forever. This was the Earth that came before Ooo, alive with ambition, waiting on the edge of a destiny it did not yet understand. As human ambition stretched further, nations began to see themselves not just as guardians of their people, but as competitors in a grand game. Progress became a race, and the prize was not only knowledge, but also power. The same rockets that carried satellites into orbit also became tools for carrying warheads. The same research that unlocked clean energy also hinted at weapons capable of reshaping the Earth itself. In boardrooms and command centers, ambition whispered dangerous promises that whoever controlled the most advanced technology would hold the future in their hands. This was the era of rivalry. Nations measured their worth not only by their art or their culture, but by the speed of their missiles, the depth of their minds, the size of their economies. Fear became tangled with ambition, each side pushing harder, faster, never willing to fall behind. The result was a world buzzing with both wonder and dread. A new medicine could be discovered one day, and the next, a weapon more terrible than anything seen before. Humanity's brilliance was matched only by its volatility. And yet for the everyday person, life still carried the rhythm of simple ambition. Parents dreamed of better futures for their children. Students studied, hoping to shape their own piece of history. Farmers worked the land, combining old traditions with new machines to feed millions. Ambition was not always grand or destructive. Sometimes it was as gentle as someone planting a seed, or writing a story, or painting a mural on a city wall. In these small ways, ambition stitched together a fragile hope that the future could be brighter. Still, the larger forces of the world pressed onward. Cities grew denser, buzzing with energy, but also straining under the weight of too many people, too much pollution, too much need. Skies over major centers grew hazy, stars hidden behind layers of smoke and artificial light. Rivers once clear and flowing grew heavy with waste. Nature whispered warnings in floods and storms and heat waves that grew more intense with each passing decade. But the human spirit was stubborn. Instead of pausing, they often pushed harder, convinced they could engineer solutions to the very problems their ambition had created. Technology made them gods in their own eyes. Machines built bigger machines, and soon automation began replacing the need for human hands. Artificial intelligence, once a dream of science fiction, began taking shape in laboratories, promising a future where thought itself could be simulated. Genetic research reached the point where life could be altered, reshaped, even created, in forms never before seen. For some, this was the dawn of utopia. For others, it was the crossing of a dangerous threshold. The irony of the age was that humanity dreamed of eternity while standing on unstable ground. Their ambition reached for immortality, for limitless energy, for dominion over the stars, and yet their societies remained fragile, vulnerable to conflict, greed, and error. It was as if they built towers higher and higher while neglecting the foundations, one tremor, one spark. And all they had created could collapse, and perhaps deep down, many of them knew it. Their stories reflected both their hope and their fear. Movies, books, and plays imagined glittering futures where hunger and disease were gone, where humanity spread peacefully among the stars. But just as often, their stories told of apocalypse-burned landscapes, ruined cities, machines turning on their makers, wars fought with weapons that could end all life. Their art was prophecy as much as it was imagination, showing them the roads they might walk if ambition turned to arrogance. This duality gave the old earth a restless energy. People marveled at their achievements while quietly fearing what might come next. Every new invention was celebrated, yet every new breakthrough carried questions. Would it bring healing or harm? Would it unite the world or divide it further? Humanity stood on the edge of something extraordinary, but they did not always know which way they were leaning, toward salvation or toward ruin. And so the age of ambition pulsed like a heartbeat, fast and loud, alive with contradictions. A world both breathtaking and dangerous, where humanity dreamed bigger than ever before, but carried shadows they could not outrun. It was a golden age and a fragile one, shining brightly against the long night that waited at the edge of history. As ambition swelled, the weight of it began pressing down harder on the world. Nations that once dreamed of exploration now armed themselves for survival. Borders became tense, skies heavy with satellites watching, listening, calculating. Humanity had reached a point where a single decision could shift the course of the entire Earth. For all their brilliance, for all their progress, their ambition had set them walking a knife's edge. Conflicts erupted, some small, some devastating. Entire regions were reshaped by wars fought not just with soldiers, but with machines guided by unseen intelligence. Drones filled the skies, silent watchers capable of both protection and destruction. Cyber networks, once celebrated as tools of connection, became battlegrounds where nations clashed without ever firing a bullet. Ambition, once directed toward building, increasingly turned toward securing dominance, no matter the cost. And yet, life for many still continued with a strange normalcy. People went to work, children played in parks, lovers walked through the city streets. The hum of everyday life disguised the undercurrent of unease. Few could see how close their world teetered toward disaster. Perhaps that is the most haunting part of this age, that for so many, it felt ordinary, even peaceful, while the foundations were already crumbling. Humanity's hunger for energy grew insatiable. They tapped deeper into the earth, split atoms, and experimented with powers they barely understood. Nuclear weapons became the ultimate symbols of ambition, twisted into threat machines of fire capable of ending cities in moments. Entire generations lived with the knowledge that one misstep could ignite the end. It was a shadow they carried silently, pretending life could go on forever, even as they built the very tools of their undoing. But not all ambition was darkness. Alongside the weapons and rivalries, there were still those who dreamed of peace. Scientists, artists, activists, and visionaries pleaded for caution, for cooperation, for harmony with the earth itself. They organized movements, created treaties, planted seeds of hope in the cracks of their fractured world. These voices remind us that humanity was never one thing. It was both the destroyer and the dreamer, the conqueror and the healer. Still, the momentum of ambition was difficult to restrain. Technology advanced too quickly, rivalries burned too fiercely, and the Earth's patience wore thin under the strain of endless extraction and conflict. History often moves in cycles, and this age was no exception. The more humanity reached, the more fragile their grip became. Looking back from the vantage point of Ooo, it feels almost inevitable, like watching a wave crest before it crashes. The age of ambition was the peak, the high point of human progress, glowing brightly against the dark horizon. It was an age of brilliance, yes, but brilliance burning too hot, too fast. The very energy that lifted them upward was the same force that would one day tear their world apart. And yet there is something deeply human in the story. To dream without restraint, to reach beyond the horizon, even when the risks are great, that is part of what made humanity so extraordinary. The world before Ooo was flawed, yes, but it was also beautiful, filled with people who dared to imagine more. Their ambition was not simply arrogance, it was also hope. A hope that tomorrow could always be brighter, even if today was difficult. So as we close this chapter of the tale, picture the Earth at its height. Glittering cities, humming machines, rockets rising into the stars, voices connected across the globe. Picture also the fragility hidden beneath it all, the quiet tension that no one could fully escape. This was the age of human ambition, radiant, restless, and fated to give way to what came next. For in the distance, beyond the skyscrapers and satellites, beyond the laughter of children and the rumble of machines, a darker story was gathering. A story of rivalry pushed too far, of weapons built without restraint, of a single spark that would light the fire of the mushroom war. For now, let yourself rest with the image of humanity in its brightest hour, full of dreams, full of contradictions, full of life. The echoes of their ambition still hum beneath Ooo, carried in the ruins, in the landscapes, and perhaps even in the quiet determination of every adventurer who still walks its fields. The age of human ambition carried within it the seeds of its own undoing, and soon those seeds began to sprout into something darker. What had once been a world thriving with invention and wonder began to feel heavy, burdened by tensions that whispered of a storm approaching. The shadows of war stretched long across the earth, subtle at first, then unavoidable. People lived their daily lives much as before. Cities buzzed with commerce, streets pulsed with light, and children filled classrooms with laughter. But beneath that surface was a quiet fear. News reports spoke of border clashes, of failed negotiations, of treaties unraveling like fragile threads. Every nation seemed to glance over its shoulder, wondering who was preparing to strike first. Leaders promised safety, promised strength, yet their speeches carried undertones of urgency, like voices raised over the crackle of a fire just beginning to spread. The shadows were not only political, but technological. Weapons had grown beyond imagination, crafted to strike faster, farther, with destructive power measured not in soldiers, but in whole cities. Missiles that could cross the globe in minutes, drones that could hover silently above unseen, satellites watching from the stars tools of protection on the surface, but always carrying the threat of retaliation. Humanity had reached a point where the thought of conflict no longer meant battlefields alone, but devastation on a scale that could shake the planet itself. Ordinary people felt it in subtle ways. Stock markets jolted with each rumor of conflict, shelves emptied in sudden bursts of panic buying, and families spoke in hushed tones about evacuation plans they hoped they would never need. School children practiced drills not only for fires or earthquakes, but for disasters far more unthinkable. Shelters were built, stocked with supplies, hidden beneath homes and schools. To grow up in such times was to know that safety was never absolute, that shadows lurked behind even the brightest days. Yet war was not only fought with weapons. Information itself became a battlefield. Nations sent waves of disinformation into one another's homes, twisting truth into tools of division. News could no longer be trusted fully, for every story carried with it the possibility of manipulation. Neighbors argued over what was real, communities fractured over what to believe. Trust, once the glue of societies, became fragile, easily broken by whispers planted with purpose. But beneath all the unease, ambition had not fully died. Some still believed that their nation, their ideology, their technology could dominate the others. For them, the coming war was not something to avoid, but something to win. And so preparations intensified. Military factories ran day and night, forging machines that seemed more suited to science fiction than reality. Submarines prowled the deep oceans, hidden fleets waiting for a signal. Satellites were armed not just with cameras, but with weapons capable of blinding enemy systems. The skies, the seas, the very stars above were caught in the web of conflict. In all this, the earth itself began to feel the strain. The natural world, already battered by centuries of exploitation, seemed to recoil from the tension. Crops failed more often, storms struck harder, and oceans swallowed more of the coasts. Some saw these as warnings, cries from the earth for peace, but the cries were drowned out by the clash of ambition and fear. Humanity's gaze was fixed too firmly on each other, too consumed by rivalry to listen to the world that had carried them so long. The shadows of war stretched further, growing darker, creeping into every corner of life. It was a time where hope was still alive but fragile, flickering like a candle against an approaching storm. Some believed peace could still be saved, that diplomacy could mend what was breaking, but others had already resigned themselves to the coming fire. And in that tension, that quiet breath before the storm, the fate of Earth was being written. The whispers of conflict soon grew louder, no longer confined to backroom negotiations or cryptic news segments. Entire regions began to bristle with tension, armies moving closer to borders, fleets gathering at sea. For the ordinary person, the world felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something no one wanted to name aloud. You could feel it in the way conversations grew quiet when politics came up, in the unease that filled the silence after someone asked, "What happens if it begins?" Governments cloaked their intentions in words of defense, yet every new missile test, Every military exercise carried the clear scent of preparation. Scientists who once dreamed of exploring the stars were redirected into programs that promised protection, though everyone knew protection was another word for destruction. Laboratories hummed late into the night, not with cures or discoveries, but with the engineering of weapons that could end cities before their citizens even looked up at the sky. For those who still remembered the Earth as it had been, green valleys, quiet coastlines, clear skies, the pace of this shift was dizzying. Old farmers watched the skies darken with the trails of aircraft, remembering a time when the horizon meant rain or sun, not fear. Children sketched pictures of rockets in their school notebooks, not as symbols of exploration, but as icons of power. Entire cultures began to bend around the inevitability of war, songs, films, and stories echoing the tension of a world that could unravel at any moment. And yet there were still voices of resistance. Movements rose calling for disarmament, for a return to cooperation, for the reminder that humanity's strength had always been in connection rather than division. Marches filled the streets of cities across the globe, candles lit in defiance against the growing dark. But these voices were often drowned out by the louder promises of leaders who assured their people that only strength could guarantee survival. The promise of peace felt fragile compared to the steel of weapons gleaming under fluorescent lights. The shadows crept into everyday life in other, subtler ways. The cost of living climbed as resources were diverted toward military stockpiles. Families struggled with shortages of food and fuel, their futures tied to policies decided in faraway halls. Students preparing for exams were told of uncertain times, while workers were reminded that sacrifice was necessary for the safety of their nations. Even dreams began to shift. Where once children dreamt of adventures, of becoming explorers or artists, many now dreamed of survival, of finding a place of safety when the storm arrived. The Earth's landscapes themselves bore witness to these preparations. Mountains, once quiet, now echoed with explosions as testing grounds for new weapons scarred their slopes. Deserts shimmered with the heat of experimental detonations, their sands forever changed by forces meant only for destruction. Deep beneath the oceans, submarines glided silently, their very presence a reminder that no place on Earth was untouched by the coming storm. What made the shadows of war most haunting was their silence. The world did not erupt all at once, but rather descended slowly, like the dimming of twilight. Day by day, piece by piece, fear and suspicion eroded the fragile trust that kept humanity united. The average person could not always point to one event that marked the beginning of the end. Instead, it was a gradual sinking, the slow realization that the world was inching closer to something it might not recover from. And still people carried on. Lovers met beneath street lamps, friends laughed in cafes, families gathered around dinner tables, all trying to hold on to the illusion of normal life. Yet even in those moments of joy, there was always the faint taste of fear, like smoke in the air long before you see the flames. Every smile, every moment of warmth was shadowed by the question, how much longer will this last? As the shadows lengthened, trust between nations began to unravel like a frayed rope. What had once been allies looked at one another with suspicion, questioning motives, searching for hidden betrayals. Trade agreements collapsed overnight, borders tightened, and the free flow of people and ideas slowed until the world felt smaller, suffocated by its own fear. The great interconnected web of humanity, so recently celebrated as progress, was breaking into guarded silos, each determined to outlast the others. Technology that had once been shared across borders was now hoarded, locked away in the name of security. Scientists who once collaborated across oceans now worked behind closed doors, forbidden to speak to colleagues beyond their nation's reach. This isolation fueled paranoia. If another nation kept a secret, it must mean danger. If they tested something new, it must mean a weapon. The whispers of what might be were enough to escalate tensions higher. Ordinary people, too, felt the divide. Neighbors from different backgrounds, once comfortable with one another, began to look with quiet mistrust. Rumors painted outsiders as spies or saboteurs. Fear, when fed daily, grows roots quickly, and those roots twisted deep into the soil of human communities. Walls were built not only of stone and steel, but of perception, separating one person from another, turning strangers into threats. The military presence grew impossible to ignore. Where once the horizon showed mountains or oceans, now it was broken by fleets of warships, aircraft cutting patterns into the sky, or convoys of armored vehicles rumbling through city streets. These displays of power were framed as reassurance, proof of strength, but to those who lived beneath them, they were reminders that conflict was no longer an if but a when. The shadows of war were no longer creeping. They were marching. And yet, alongside the dread was an unsettling fascination. People gathered around television screens to watch broadcasts of missile launches or satellite tests, caught between horror and awe. These were machines capable of reshaping the earth, and though most feared them, a part of humanity could not help but marvel at the scale of what they had created. It was a paradox that defined the age, terrified of destruction, yet enthralled by the very tools of it. Nature bore silent witness to these preparations. Forests were cut down to make way for testing facilities. Rivers were rerouted to cool reactors or feed massive factories. The earth, already strained, groaned under the weight of humanity's ambitions and fears. Animals vanished from regions scarred by pollution and waste. Some scientists warned that even without war, these practices would lead to disaster. But their voices were small compared to the roar of engines, the crack of weapons, the speeches promising dominance. Everywhere, the feeling of living on borrowed time grew stronger. Families began to store supplies, some digging their own small bunkers beneath their homes, others relying on government shelters hidden under cities. Emergency broadcasts became a familiar part of daily life, instructing citizens on what to do in case of attack, what signals to listen for, where to go if sirens screamed in the night. The thought of catastrophe no longer belonged to wild imaginations. It was planned for, expected, practiced. Yet life continued in strange duality. Weddings were held, children were born, music filled the air, all as though the world might not end. Perhaps this was humanity's most enduring quality, to cling to joy even as shadows gathered. People laughed at jokes, shared meals, sang songs, because to surrender completely to fear would have been its own kind of defeat. In those quiet acts of resilience, there was a beauty, even if it could not stop what was coming. But behind the laughter, the storm kept building. Leaders spoke in harsher tones, ultimatums replaced negotiations, and every action was seen as provocation. The world had become like a matchbox filled with sparks and fumes, waiting for the smallest flame. Diplomats tried to soothe tensions, but their voices were drowned by the thunder of marching boots and the hum of engines preparing for war. There was no single moment when the world chose this path. It was not one decision, but 1,000 small ones, each building upon the last. Fear feeding ambition, ambition feeding fear, until the cycle became unstoppable. Humanity had created a machine too vast to halt, a momentum that carried them forward even when they knew where it led. The shadows were no longer shadows. They were the looming outline of a firestorm. By this point, humanity could almost hear the ticking of its own countdown. The world had grown restless, caught between fear of destruction and the certainty that it was drawing near. Every headline, every whispered rumor carried the weight of inevitability. Even the seasons seemed different. Winters felt colder, summers harsher, as though the earth itself mirrored the anxiety of its people. There were still those who tried to pull humanity back from the edge. Teachers spoke gently to their students about peace, reminding them of shared humanity. Artists painted hopeful visions of unity, filling canvases with bright colors that contrasted sharply with the gray tone of the times. Some leaders still believed compromise could hold the world together, but their voices were drowned out by louder, angrier shouts, promising strength through dominance. Hope flickered like a candle in a storm, fragile but unwilling to go out completely. Technology, once the symbol of progress, became the looming figure of dread. Vast machines sat waiting in silos, silent giants capable of tearing the sky apart. Submarines crept beneath oceans with their hidden payloads, unseen but always present. Satellites circled high above, eyes that never blinked. Their quiet watchfulness a reminder that privacy and safety were illusions. The more the world looked upward, downward, outward, the more it seemed trapped in its own reflection, too clever to step back, too fearful to stop. In homes across the earth, families kept radios close, listening for signals that never came but always could. Sirens were tested so often that their wails became part of the landscape, no longer shocking but woven into daily life. Children grew up learning how to crouch beneath desks, how to find the nearest shelter, how to breathe steadily through fear. These drills were framed as safety, but everyone knew what they really meant. They were rehearsals for a day no one wanted to arrive. Skies reflected the age's unease. The trails of jets and rockets etched white scars against the blue, reminders that the heavens were no longer places of wonder, but staging grounds for battle. At night, people looked up at the stars, but instead of dreaming of voyages and discoveries, they wondered how many weapons floated silently above them, unseen but waiting. The cosmos, once a symbol of possibility, had been dragged into the theater of fear. And yet, in this uneasy twilight, the world remained alive. Cities still glowed at night, bustling with laughter and music. Lovers still met in parks, children still played on sidewalks, strangers still exchanged kindness in small, fleeting moments. These acts of life were fragile, but they mattered. They were the quiet defiance of a species unwilling to surrender entirely to its own shadow. If anything, they made the looming threat even more heartbreaking, for they showed what could be lost. Still, there were places where the storm was already felt. Remote villages near testing sites spoke of skies that turned strange colors, of animals that wandered away and never returned. Farmers found their crops twisted or ruined, waters carrying tastes they had never known. Scientists who studied the atmosphere warned of damage building faster than anyone could repair, but these warnings were drowned out, dismissed as exaggerations in a world too committed to its path. In some corners of the earth, whispers began of something worse than conventional war rumors of weapons beyond imagination, experiments tampering with forces no one fully understood. Whether these whispers were true or only fears magnified by paranoia, they spread like wildfire, adding another layer of dread to a world already trembling. The idea that humanity might destroy itself not only with fire and metal, but with something more mysterious haunted the late nights of those who listened. The world stood in suspension, poised on the edge of decision. Every day felt like it might be the last before the storm broke. For some, the waiting was worse than the war itself, a slow, drawn-out descent that hollowed out hope. For others, denial became a kind of shield. They went about their lives as though nothing loomed ahead, as though the shadows might somehow dissolve if ignored long enough. But shadows do not dissolve on their own. They lengthen, they deepen, until they become the darkness itself. Humanity had lived so long in the growing shadow of war that many forgot the warmth of peace. And as the countdown drew closer, there was a sense, deep in the bones of the earth, that something irreversible was about to unfold. The stage was set. The actors were ready, though none of them truly understood the weight of the roles they played. The tools of ambition and fear had already been built, and all it would take was a spark, a single moment of fire to tip the world from shadow into flame. And when that moment arrived, there would be no turning back. It was the final breath before the storm, the silent pause before the first crack of thunder. The world, so full of life, so full of ambition, was about to step into a night from which it could not easily return. There comes a moment in every great story when the air feels different, when the world itself seems to hush, as though it knows something is about to happen. In the tale of pre-Mushroom War Earth, that moment was not a single explosion or a dramatic clash of armies. It was quieter, stranger, and more haunting than that. The turning point was marked by silence. It is hard to imagine a planet so loud suddenly falling quiet. For years, cities had hummed with machines, skies had carried the roar of jets, and streets had been filled with the sounds of endless life. Then one day the soundscape shifted. Perhaps it began with fewer planes in the sky, fewer ships in the harbors, fewer voices in the public squares. The routines of humanity slowed as the weight of the coming storm pressed down. People still lived their lives, but the world felt different, as if every sound carried an echo of waiting. Historians, if they could stand in that moment, might call it hesitation. Nations, armed to the teeth, stood on the edge of decision. Their hands hovered over buttons and levers that could end everything, yet hesitation lingered like a breath held too long. The silence was not peace, not truly. It was the kind of quiet that comes when animals freeze in the forest, sensing a predator nearby. It was the hush before lightning splits the sky. Ordinary people felt this turning point in subtle ways. Markets that once bustled seemed strangely subdued, as though customers moved with heavier steps. Children played outside, but their laughter seemed thinner, watched closely by parents who kept their eyes fixed on the horizon. Radios and televisions still played music, still broadcast shows, but interruptions for emergency tests grew more frequent. The cheerful programs framed by a constant reminder that something was wrong. Even nature seemed to sense the shift. Birds flew in odd patterns, migrating earlier or later than expected. Animals in forests and fields behaved strangely, as though sensing that the ground beneath them was unsettled. Skies carried a tension no weather could explain, and nights felt darker, as if the stars themselves had grown dim with unease. For some, this silence was a time of false hope. Perhaps, they thought, this pause meant reason had prevailed. Perhaps leaders were stepping back from the brink. Maybe, just maybe, the world would survive without disaster. And for a little while, the dream of survival breathed again in hearts weary of fear. People whispered prayers, made promises to live differently if given the chance, and dreamed of a second chance for humanity. Yet beneath that fragile hope was another truth. The silence was not retreat. It was gathering. The storm had not passed over, but was instead coiling tighter, preparing to strike. The great machines of war were already in place, the weapons already primed. It was as if the earth itself was waiting for one careless spark to ignite the fuel that had been spread across every corner of society. This is what makes the silent turning point so haunting in memory. It was the moment when the world might have turned toward peace or slipped into ruin. The scales balanced so delicately that even the smallest gesture could tip them. And in the end, the silence tipped not toward peace, but toward tragedy. Imagine walking through a city during that time. Neon lights still glowed in windows. Street vendors still sold their wares. Couples still held hands as they strolled along. But there was something in the air, an unspoken agreement, that the world was holding its breath. Every laugh felt like defiance. Every act of kindness, a fragile shield against the weight pressing down on everyone. The silence was not absence. It was presence. Presence of fear. Presence of anticipation. Presence of an ending that everyone could feel but no one wanted to name. And when silence reaches such intensity, it can only last so long. In those days of eerie quiet, the most ordinary moments carried strange weight. A train leaving a station seemed slower, its whistle echoing longer in the air. Marketplaces, once crowded with lively voices, now had long pauses between the sounds of bargaining. Even the ring of a telephone in someone's home felt sharper, as though the world leaned in to hear what news might be on the other end. Life did not stop, but everything felt charged, every detail more noticeable, because people sensed these could be the last ordinary days. The silence seeped into politics as well. Leaders who once gave fiery speeches began to speak less often, their words more measured, their faces tighter. Public appearances grew fewer. Decisions were happening behind closed doors, and ordinary citizens could feel it. That sense of something moving in the dark where they could not see. Rumors spread quickly. Some said deals were being made. Others whispered that secret attacks had already begun. But no one could confirm anything. The silence bred uncertainty, and uncertainty bred fear. Children asked questions their parents struggled to answer. Why are we practicing drills so often? Why does the sky seem so empty? Why are the neighbors leaving town? Parents tried to reassure them, tried to keep their homes filled with normal rhythms. Bedtime stories, dinners together, games and laughter. But beneath the comfort lay worry that could not be hidden forever. Children feel what adults carry, even when words are softened. And so even their games change, imitating the drills and warnings they saw around them. The natural world mirrored humanity's unease in uncanny ways. Forests seemed quieter, birdsong less frequent. As though the animals had learned to share the hush. Rivers ran on, but their steady flow sounded louder against the backdrop of silence. The earth itself was calm, almost too calm, as though bracing for what was coming. To some, this was comforting, a sense that the planet was preparing itself alongside its people. To others, it was terrifying, as if the earth already knew it was about to be scarred. Even technology, which once thrummed with energy and promise, became muted. Factories slowed, their great machines no longer roaring at full capacity, but waiting, humming softly, poised for commands that might unleash them again. Streets filled with cars one day and emptied the next. Traffic flowing unevenly, like breath that caught in the throat. Screens in homes flickered with images of leaders, soldiers, and symbols of power. Their voices calm, but too calm, rehearsed, practiced, like actors holding back from revealing the final act. For many, the silence was worse than conflict itself. At least in action there was clarity, but in this pause there was only guessing. People lay awake at night, staring at ceilings, their minds racing with possibilities. Would tomorrow bring peace or catastrophe? Would they wake to sunlight or to sirens? Even sleep became uneasy, dreams carrying strange fragments of fire, water, and falling skies. And yet there was no explosion, no collapse, only the endless waiting. And that waiting reshaped the soul of humanity. In one way, it drew people closer. Neighbors looked after each other more tenderly. Strangers offered small kindnesses. Families drew tighter around the dinner table. If the end was coming, they wanted to meet it together. But in another way, it widened the cracks. Some grew suspicious, quick to blame those who looked or spoke differently. Fear made people protective, but also defensive, guarding their circles and distrusting the outside. All of this created a strange paradox. The world was both fragile and unbroken, frightened and resilient. It was as if humanity stood in a doorway, unsure whether to step forward or back, clinging to both hope and despair at once. And this tension, stretched so thin, could not last forever. The silence was not a resolution, it was only a pause, and everyone knew deep down that the pause would not hold for long. It was during this quiet season that the first unmistakable signs appeared, subtle at first, then undeniable. Supply lines that once ran smoothly between cities faltered without clear explanation. A shipment of grain vanished, and the official story was that it had spoiled, yet whispers insisted it was seized and redirected. Small towns found their fuel reserves suddenly delayed. Doctors began reporting shortages of medicines that had always been easy to acquire. These disruptions were not random. They were patterns, pieces of a larger design unfolding out of sight. For the ordinary person, these were inconveniences, frustrations to be worked around. But underneath, they carried a deeper weight. People knew instinctively that resources were being stockpiled, hidden away, or quietly rerouted. It was preparation, though no one would admit it aloud. The silence was beginning to crack, not with the sound of weapons, but with the rustle of supply ledgers and the shuffle of guarded transport trucks moving at night. Then came the sudden disappearances. Not of goods, but of people. Scientists invited to closed meetings who never returned to their universities. Military officers reassigned without public notice. Even journalists, known for asking difficult questions, began vanishing from their posts. In their place, newspapers ran calmer, gentler headlines, all insisting there was no need to worry and that progress continued, that safety was assured. Yet the very absence of critical voices spoke louder than any reassurance could. The world had begun to rehearse the future. Cities practiced more evacuation drills, not just in schools, but in entire districts. Governments tested siren systems, warning citizens not to panic when they blared unexpectedly in the afternoon. On radios, people heard official voices, calm and steady, describing what to do if danger struck. They never said what kind of danger, but everyone knew. It was the unspoken subject of every conversation, the shadow behind every meal, the thing parents tried to hide from children, yet failed to conceal in their tone of voice. And yet, within this growing unease, life still persisted. Lovers still met in quiet cafes, sketching plans for futures they hoped to see. Musicians still played in dimly lit halls, their songs carrying an almost desperate beauty as though each note was an act of defiance against the silence. Farmers still bent over their fields, planting seeds with the faith that the earth would endure no matter what humans unleashed upon it. This resilience, though fragile, kept the silence from becoming despair. But the silence was fraying. Border regions reported strange flashes of light in the night sky, too bright and too controlled to be natural. Some said they were weapons tests. Others claimed they were scientific experiments. But either way, they filled the air with unease. Fishermen on distant coasts spoke of hearing thunder with no storms above, low rumbles that carried across the water like the growl of a buried beast. Travelers described sudden military checkpoints appearing on once open roads, soldiers speaking little, their eyes fixed straight ahead. These were not battles, not yet, but they were the opening chords of a coming storm. The world was no longer merely waiting. It was edging closer, step by cautious step, to the threshold. The silence that had once seemed suffocating was now thin, fragile, a veil trembling in the wind. Everyone could feel it. Something was pressing against it from the other side, ready to break through. And when it broke, there would be no going back. People spoke less about peace in those days, though the word still lingered on official posters and speeches. Instead, they spoke of endurance, of holding on, of surviving what might come. The tone had shifted, without anyone declaring it outright. This was no longer about preventing what loomed ahead. It was about bracing for impact. And in that shift, subtle but irreversible, humanity revealed that it already knew the turning point had been crossed. The silence had done its work. It had stretched hearts and minds to the breaking point, had made every small sound louder, every choice heavier. And now, in the cracks forming across society, the quiet was preparing to give way to something else entirely, a roar that would reshape the earth forever. There was a particular kind of quiet that settled into city streets during those final years, a quiet that was not born of peace, but of restraint. Markets opened later, closed earlier, and their shelves carried fewer goods. People stopped lingering after dark, not because of laws, but because of a subtle fear that had no single name. Friends still met, but their conversations leaned more toward whispers, as if the very air had grown sensitive to their words. Radios and televisions hummed, filling homes with endless streams of official programming. But it was the pauses, the spaces between those carefully crafted sentences that people remembered most. It was a world holding its breath. Technology, once celebrated as a symbol of human progress, was now double-edged. Satellite images revealed military buildups and shifting alliances, though the images shown to the public were softened, curated, stripped of urgency. Computers crunched endless streams of data, predicting outcomes, simulating disasters, mapping survival scenarios. Every breakthrough was quietly classified, tucked away in secured facilities. What had once been proudly displayed to the world in science fairs and international showcases was now hidden behind locked doors. Humanity had stepped into the shadow of its own genius, and for the first time, it was afraid of the very knowledge it had created. Even entertainment reflected the silence. Films grew darker, their plots circling around themes of survival, catastrophe, and redemption. Books dwelled on fractured societies and uncertain futures. Audiences consumed these stories not only for distraction but for practice, as though by watching or reading them, they could prepare themselves for what loomed ahead. Art in its way became prophecy. And yet, beneath this heavy stillness, there were moments that gleamed with a strange clarity. In small towns, neighbors gathered more often, supporting one another when shortages came. In great cities, strangers held the doors for each other, perhaps sensing that kindness mattered more when the future was uncertain. People married, had children, planted gardens, built houses, wrote poetry, all with an almost stubborn hope. The silence did not erase the human spirit, it sharpened it, distilled it into something simple and resilient. But silence has limits, and slowly, steadily, those limits were reached. The first signs of the break were almost imperceptible. A power station shutting down without warning, plunging a city into darkness for an entire night. A sudden, unexplained surge of military vehicles rushing across highways usually reserved for commuters. Rumors of underground shelters being completed, of bunkers fully stocked, of hidden places where the elite could retreat if the world above shattered. None of these events were confirmed, yet they spread through whispers faster than any news broadcast could keep up with. Children began asking their parents what war really meant. Teenagers spoke casually of apocalypse as if it were inevitable, a natural disaster already in motion. Adults carried the knowledge quietly, sometimes with bitterness, sometimes with the resignation, but always with the same weary weight. The silence was no longer a shield. It was a countdown, and every day it grew shorter. And then, without declaration or ceremony, the world crossed the invisible line. It did not erupt in one single instant, but through a series of cascading moments. A failed negotiation here, a test detonation there, a skirmish in a remote region that was small on its own but enormous in meaning. The news framed these events as isolated, controllable, but the people watching from their dimly lit homes understood. They could hear the strain in the voices of officials, the hesitation in their reassurances. The silence was breaking, splintering into 1,000 cracks. In those final nights before the storm, the earth itself seemed to know. Winds carried an unnatural sharpness, as though the air was bracing itself. The stars above looked colder, sharper, less like companions and more like witnesses. Cities glowed faintly in the darkness, islands of light in a vast sea, but beneath that glow fear coiled tightly in every home, in every heart. The silent turning point had passed. Humanity had moved beyond hesitation and into inevitability. The stillness that had defined those years was not peace, but preparation, and it had served its purpose. All that was left was the release, the thunder that follows the long, unbearable pause. And when it came, it would not only reshape nations, but remake the earth itself. The landscapes, the skies, the oceans, even the foundations of reality would bend beneath what was about to be unleashed. This was the moment before Ooo, the last time Earth still belonged wholly to humanity. The quiet had carried them to the edge, and now, with the faintest tremble, it was letting go. When the quiet finally shattered and the storm of the Mushroom War swept across the earth, it left behind not only scars on the surface, but entire histories entombed beneath it. What we now call the land of Ooo rose from those ashes, layered over the ruins of a civilization that stretched further and reached higher than anything the world of Finn and Jake could imagine. To walk across Oo's grassy meadows or to gaze at its candy-colored kingdoms is to tread unknowingly over a world long buried, a world of glass and steel, of voices and visions that are silent now. The ruins are still there, hidden beneath soil, mountains, and enchanted forests. Sometimes they peek through like jagged teeth of a forgotten beast. Crumbled skyscrapers half swallowed by hills, bridges that end abruptly in midair, strange metal husks rusting in the desert sands. Ooo is full of magic and wonder, but woven into its fabric are shadows of the earth that came before. Consider the dark caverns beneath cities like the Candy Kingdom. They are not natural caves at all, but collapsed subway tunnels, underground malls, and laboratories whose names have long been erased. Machines slumber in the depths, their wires choked by roots, their purposes forgotten. Some still hum faintly, powered by scraps of energy like ghosts refusing to rest. For the inhabitants of Ooo, these places are curiosities, sometimes dangerous, sometimes wondrous. For us, They are a glimpse at the life humans once built before the world turned. Imagine the lonely plains of Ooo, where wildflowers grow thick and rivers trickle quietly through valleys. Those same plains may cover what was once farmland, vast stretches of wheat and corn feeding millions. Somewhere under the soil, abandoned tractors and irrigation systems sleep, surrounded by earth that has reclaimed them. The people of Ooo walk these fields without ever knowing that beneath their feet lie the tools of human ambition, rusting away into dust. There are whispers that even Oo's mountains carry secrets. The rocky peaks that adventurers climb for treasure may hide hollow cores filled with bunkers or old research facilities. Some say these were places where scientists stored their greatest experiments, shielded from the surface. Over time, the walls cracked, and what spilled from within mingled with the new magic that flooded into the earth. The result was a world where science and sorcery blurred together, birthing the strange creatures that wander Ooo today. Every ruin is a memory. The wreckage of plains frozen into cliff sides tells of skies once filled with human travel. The rusting hulls of submarines at the bottom of Oo's oceans whisper of nations that once ruled the seas. Even the smallest fragments, like a shard of glass or a dented coin, are echoes of lives lived long ago, lives that laughed, loved, worried, and dreamed before being swallowed by catastrophe. But the most haunting of all are the cities that were buried whole. Some legends in Ooo speak of endless labyrinths underground, where towers still stand intact but unseen, their windows staring into darkness. These forgotten cities are said to stretch for miles, sealed away when the surface burned. What lies inside them now, skeletons, treasures, or secrets too dangerous to reveal, remains a mystery. Perhaps some brave soul will stumble upon them one day, peeling back the earth to find that history was never gone, only sleeping. For the people of Ooo, these buried worlds are stories at best, warnings at worst. Yet for us, looking back, they are reminders. The earth that existed before was not erased entirely. It lingers, preserved in fragments, stitched into the very foundation of Ooo. And though magic has painted the land in new colors, beneath every blade of enchanted grass is the memory of a human hand that once planted seeds in the soil. Not all of what was buried lies still. Sometimes the old world pushes back, forcing its presence into the lives of those who wander too close. Adventurers in Ooo occasionally stumble into ruins and awaken machines that were never meant to see daylight again. A flicker of artificial light in a dark corridor, the grinding sound of gears turning after centuries of silence. These are the echoes of a human age refusing to remain forgotten. One tale speaks of a wanderer who discovered an intact chamber beneath the Ice Kingdom. Within it, rows of screens flickered to life as if recognizing a visitor after a long slumber. The symbols and languages on those screens meant nothing to the traveler, but the hum of the machines carried a strange sadness, like the heartbeat of a ghost. For Ooo, it was a marvel, something to tell in hushed tones. For us, it is a reminder that the world beneath the surface still remembers, even if the people above do not. Then there are the machines that never truly stop working. Across Ooo, one can find strange towers humming faintly with energy, their original purposes long obscured. Some of them may have been communication hubs trying desperately to send signals into a world that no longer answered. Others might have been weapons, their destructive potential neutered by age, but their forms still standing like monuments to forgotten wars. In Ooo, these towers are sometimes mistaken for magical structures, and perhaps, in a way, they are. For what is magic if not technology whose language has been lost? The oceans, too, are vast graves of the old earth. Beneath Oo's rolling waves lie countless wrecks, cargo ships, military vessels, even floating laboratories swallowed by the sea. Corals twist around their frames, fish dart through shattered windows, and seaweed carpets control panels that once buzzed with life. Some legends say that deep below, entire fleets still rest intact, their lights flickering faintly in the dark, like drowned stars. The merfolk and aquatic creatures of Ooo may swim past these relics without care, but to us, they are haunting reminders of how completely the ocean absorbed humanity's ambition and its downfall. Not every fragment is grand or dramatic. Sometimes the buried past appears in small, almost tender ways. A child of Ooo might stumble upon a rusted toy half buried in the dirt, its plastic smile still faintly visible. A farmer could find a shard of ceramic while tilling the soil, not knowing it was once part of a family's dinner table. These little relics carry as much weight as the crumbling cities and towering ruins, for they remind us of the people who once lived ordinary lives in the shadow of extraordinary events. And then there are the dangerous remnants. Some weapons of the old world did not vanish. They slumbered. Entire caches of explosives and devices still lie sealed in underground vaults, waiting for the unlucky or the reckless to disturb them. Even in the time of Ooo, characters sometimes stumble upon things they should not power too unstable, devices too corrupted. The Great Mushroom War may have ended, but its fingerprints linger in these forgotten caches, as sharp and threatening as ever. The strangest part of all is how seamlessly the buried past has become part of Ooo itself. In some places, magical forests grow over what were once sprawling cities. The roots of enchanted trees wind through skyscraper skeletons, their branches glowing softly against cracked concrete. Rivers bend their courses through highways, filling the hollow lanes with glimmering streams. Nature and magic did not simply cover the ruins, they reclaimed them, weaving them into the world's new fabric. For the citizens of Ooo, the ruins are just another oddity, as normal as a talking candy person or a kingdom of fire. For us, though, they are a story carved into the bones of the earth. There is something haunting about the thought of Ooo resting on top of an entire world's bones. Every kingdom, every meadow, every strange and magical landscape stands where another civilization once thrived. It is not only ruins and machines that are buried, but entire lives, entire cultures, pressed into the earth like fossils. The candy people laugh in their bright streets, but beneath those streets, there may be libraries once filled with voices and ideas, now silenced and unreadable. The Fire Kingdom burns fiercely with its volcanic energy, yet under its molten crust might lie factories and power plants that once harnessed fire in a far more controlled but far less wondrous way. The people of Ooo rarely question these buried foundations. To them, the world has always been strange and magical, a place where mountains talk and artifacts hum with mysterious power. But if you look closely, you can see how the old world bleeds into the new. Sometimes, Ooo citizens treat relics of the past as simple curiosities, shards of glass, mistaken for jewels, metal scraps turned into tools, or machines worshipped as divine objects. Other times, the buried past shapes entire destinies. Peppermint Butler's knowledge of forbidden magic, for instance, may come in part from digging too deep into forgotten vaults. Even Princess Bubblegum, with all her scientific brilliance, stands as a bridge between two worlds, a being of magic and candy, who nonetheless builds laboratories upon ancient ruins as if instinctively retracing humanity's steps. One of the eeriest aspects of the buried earth is how memory itself has become fragmented. In Ooo, there are stories told by creatures who half remember the old world, though their details are twisted by time. A dragon might hoard not only gold, but twisted scraps of steel, believing them to be treasures of unimaginable power. A group of travelers might stumble into a ruin and think of it as a temple, never realizing it was once a shopping mall. Legends grow like vines over these broken places, replacing history with myth until the line between them is impossible to untangle. And then there is the question of what still waits, perfectly preserved beneath the soil. Some suggest that entire archives of knowledge were sealed away during the Mushroom War, waiting for the right person, or perhaps the wrong one, to unearth them. Imagine the kind of books and data hidden in such vaults. Blueprints of technologies long forgotten, medical research that could cure ailments Oo's healers cannot, or even plans for weapons more devastating than anything already unleashed. If any of these caches are ever discovered, they could change the course of Ooo forever, for better or worse. Sometimes the buried past reveals itself in unsettling ways. Travelers speak of hearing voices in abandoned ruins, though no one else is there. Not ghostly voices, but mechanical ones. The recordings of humans long gone, still playing their messages into empty air. In one corner of Ooo, a machine was said to project faint holograms of people in suits, endlessly repeating the same motions as though stuck in a loop. To the people of Ooo, these images are strange and magical apparitions. To us, they are heartbreaking glimpses of lives that once bustled with ordinary routine, now reduced to flickering shadows in the dark. The deeper one digs, the more blurred the line becomes between what was science and what is now mistaken for sorcery. A glowing crystal in a ruin might be a nuclear core, its energy still alive after centuries. A set of strange metal suits might be the remains of old military armor, mistaken for magical relics. Even BMO, that cheerful little console, is a remnant of human creation technology that somehow survived the end and continues to live in Ooo, a bridge between epochs. And through it all, there is a sense that the earth itself remembers. The soil carries traces of radiation and ruin, yet it also nurtures enchanted forests and kingdoms of candy. The oceans hide rusting fleets, but also give rise to sea serpents and merfolk. The sky no longer echoes with jets and satellites, but instead carries cosmic beings and stars that seem alive. The past has not vanished. It is woven into the roots, the rivers, and the very heartbeat of Ooo, like a secret lullaby sung by the earth itself. There is a quiet truth that hums beneath every step taken in Ooo. The past never really left. It is there, beneath the layers of soil, beneath the candy kingdoms and enchanted forests, beneath the laughter and the sorrow. It is a foundation made of memory and ruin, of choices and consequences that shaped the world to come. Some of Oo's creatures sense this truth, even if they do not fully understand it. They pause in places where the ruins of the old world lie close to the surface, uneasy in the presence of forgotten machines or silent, hollow-eyed windows staring out from underground halls. Others are drawn to it, compelled to explore the remnants of what came before, to salvage or to worship. Each encounter with the buried past is like touching a scar, painful, but proof that something once lived, once mattered. And perhaps, in some strange way, Ooo itself thrives because of this layering. The magic that pulses through its land seems to have seeped into the cracks of old steel and stone, filling the emptiness with life. In this way, the ruins have not only been buried, they have been reborn. The shattered laboratories may now be caverns of glowing fungi. The husks of fallen skyscrapers may serve as nesting grounds for birds with jeweled feathers. Even the rusting shells of tanks and planes may now rest peacefully in meadows, softened by moss and embraced by roots. It is strange to think that what was once built for control and conquest now lies humbled beneath fields of flowers and rivers of magic. That is the paradox of Ooo. It is both a graveyard and a cradle. It carries the memory of what humanity lost, while also nurturing what came after. The past does not vanish, it transforms, and in that transformation, it continues to whisper. Perhaps this is why the land of Ooo feels so alive, so haunted, so endlessly rich with mystery. Every ruin, every half-buried fragment adds to its depth. For Finn and Jake, the world is a playground of adventure and danger. For us, watching from the outside, it is a story of cycles, of endings becoming beginnings, of a past that shapes the present, even when it lies hidden. When you imagine Oo's landscapes, now its rolling hills, its shimmering kingdoms, its strange and wonderful creatures, remember that they stand atop the bones of another age. The laughter of the candy people, the songs of Marceline, even the crackling jokes of BMO, all of them, echo above a silence that was never fully broken, only buried. And in that layering lies something deeply human, a reminder that even in ruin, even in loss, life finds a way to continue, to reimagine, to dream. So tonight, as you close your eyes and drift into rest, think of Ooo not only as a land of magic and wonder, but as a land of memory. Beneath every step, beneath every tree, beneath every castle and kingdom, there are stories still sleeping. Stories of the earth that was, and the earth that will always live beneath the surface. And maybe that is the greatest comfort of all, that nothing is ever truly lost. It is simply buried, waiting quietly, like a dream beneath a dream. Good night, sleepyheads. May your dreams be gentle, and may the whispers of forgotten worlds carry you softly into sleep.